I never thought my backup generator would become the most controversial piece of equipment in Oak Ridge Estates. But that's exactly what happened when the worst ice storm in 30 years descended on Springfield, Missouri, and turned my entire subdivision into a frozen hellscape where power lines snapped like brittle twigs and everyone's true colors came shining through. My name is Brian Foster, and I'm a telecommunications engineer who works from home about 60% of the time. I'd moved into Oak Ridge Estates 3 years ago, thinking the upscale subdivision with its manicured lawns and strict architectural guidelines would be a peaceful place to settle down after my divorce. The house was perfect, a 2-story colonial with a finished basement, and I'd specifically chosen a property that backed up to the drainage creek running through the development. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was just how power-hungry our homeowners association president would become, or how a simple act of preparation would turn into a neighborhood war. The trouble started on a Wednesday morning in late January when the meteorologists began sounding alarm bells about an Arctic blast combined with a moisture-laden system from the Gulf. They were predicting freezing rain, sleet, and temperatures plummeting into the single digits. Having lived through similar storms during my childhood in rural Kansas, I knew exactly what that meant: downed power lines, extended outages, and potentially dangerous conditions for anyone unprepared. I'd purchased my Generac 22 kW standby generator 2 years earlier after a summer storm knocked out power for 4 days and cost me about $800 in spoiled food. The installation hadn't been cheap, running me nearly $12,000 with the automatic transfer switch, concrete pad, and professional installation. But I considered it essential infrastructure, especially since I needed reliable internet and power for my work. The generator was properly permitted, installed according to all local codes, and positioned on the side of my house with appropriate setbacks from property lines. I'd submitted all the paperwork to the HOA before installation, and after some back and forth about the placement and screening vegetation, they'd approved it with the stipulation that I plant some evergreen shrubs to minimize visual impact. I'd complied immediately, spending another $500 on arborvitae that would eventually grow into a nice privacy screen. The generator ran on natural gas from the city line, which meant it could theoretically operate indefinitely as long as the gas supply remained intact. It was designed to kick on automatically whenever it detected a power loss, run a weekly self-test, and keep my entire house operational during outages. In my mind, it was one of the smartest investments I'd ever made. Wednesday afternoon, I made my usual pre-storm preparations. I filled both bathtubs with water, charged all my devices, did my grocery shopping, and made sure I had plenty of food that could be prepared easily. I also filled my truck's gas tank, though I wouldn't need it for the generator. The temperature was already dropping, and the first freezing drizzle started around 6 in the evening. By Thursday morning, Oak Ridge Estates looked like a crystal wonderland. Every surface was coated in a thick layer of ice that sparkled in the weak morning light. Tree branches sagged under the weight, and I could hear the occasional crack and crash as limbs gave way. The power was still on at that point, though I knew it was only a matter of time. I was video conferencing with a client in Seattle when the lights flickered twice, and then went dark. My computer screens went black for maybe 5 seconds before the generator detected the outage and kicked on. The automatic transfer switch did its job perfectly, and within those few seconds, power was flowing back to my house. My internet modem and router rebooted quickly, and I was back online explaining to my client that we just lost commercial power but my backup system had engaged. The generator's hum was noticeable but not excessive. It sat on its concrete pad about 15 feet from my house, and the sound was maybe comparable to a riding lawn mower, though not quite as loud. Inside my house, with the windows closed, I could barely hear it at all. I continued working through the morning, grateful for my foresight. Around 11, I decided to take a break and check on my neighbors. The ice was treacherous, and I put on my hiking boots with good traction before carefully making my way down the driveway. My neighbor to the left, Gary Brennan, was an airline pilot who was fortunately grounded due to the weather. He was standing in his garage, looking at his dark house with a frustrated expression. "How long do you think we'll be out?" he called over to me. "Based on what I'm seeing, could be days," I replied, carefully crossing the icy street. The utility companies reporting over 50,000 customers without power across the county. "Damn, I should have gotten one of those generators like you did." "You're welcome to come over if you need to charge phones or warm up," I offered. "I've got coffee going and everything." He thanked me and said his wife was already talking about going to her sister's place in Branson if the power didn't come back by evening. We chatted for a few more minutes before I carefully made my way back home, stopping to check on the elderly couple who lived directly across from me. They were already packing to stay with their daughter in town. I just settled back into my work when my doorbell rang around 2 in the afternoon. Standing on my front porch, bundled in a designer puffy coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, was Patricia Cunningham, the president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Patricia was 53 years old, though she'd clearly spent a considerable amount of money trying to look 40. She had the characteristic haircut, that stacked bob with the shorter back and longer front that seemed to be standard issue for HOA presidents everywhere. Her SUV, a massive white Escalade, was parked in my driveway with the engine running. "Brian," she said curtly when I opened the door, "we need to talk about your generator." "What about it?" I asked, genuinely confused. "It's extremely loud and it's disturbing the peace of the neighborhood." I looked at her, then past her at the ice-covered wasteland that was our subdivision. "Patricia, there's no power anywhere in the neighborhood. The peace is already pretty well disturbed." Her expression hardened. "That's not the point. The HOA bylaws clearly state that excessive noise is prohibited, and your generator is creating excessive noise. It's a backup generator doing exactly what it's designed to do during a power outage," I explained patiently. "It's properly permitted and approved by the HOA. I have all the documentation. The approval was for having the generator installed, not for running it at all hours in a way that disturbs other residents." "Who exactly is it disturbing? Half the neighborhood has evacuated, and the rest are probably grateful someone's prepared." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "I'm disturbed by it. I'm trying to rest, and that constant droning noise is making it impossible." "Where are you staying?" I asked, because this was relevant. "At my home, obviously." "On Clearwater Drive." That was 3 streets away from my house on Willow Creek Lane. "Yes, and I can still hear your generator from my bedroom." This was clearly absurd. There was no way she could hear my generator from 3 streets away, not with houses, trees, and distance between us. But Patricia had a reputation for being unreasonable, and I could see she was working herself into one of her famous tirades. "Patricia, I'm sorry, but I'm not turning off my generator. I need it for work, for heat, and for basic safety. It's cold enough inside these houses to cause pipe damage." "You are in violation of HOA regulations," she stated firmly. "I'm ordering you to cease operation of that generator immediately." "On what authority?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. Show me the specific bylaw that prevents me from running a properly installed, permitted backup generator during a legitimate power outage. She pulled out her phone and started reading from what I assumed was a digital copy of our HOA bylaws. Section 12, Paragraph 4. No homeowner shall create excessive noise that disturbs the peace and quiet enjoyment of neighboring properties. Excessive noise includes but is not limited to loud music, construction activities outside permitted hours, and mechanical equipment operation. That's talking about normal circumstances, I countered. This is an emergency situation, and the generator isn't excessively loud. It's within all legal noise ordinances. I am the president of this HOA, and I'm telling you that your generator is in violation. Turn it off now or there will be consequences. I felt my jaw tighten. What kind of consequences? Fines, for starters. $500 per day until you comply, and if you continue to refuse, we'll pursue legal action to force compliance. You're seriously threatening to fine me for having heat and power during an ice storm. I'm enforcing the rules that everyone in this neighborhood agreed to follow when they purchased their homes. We stared at each other for a long moment. The ice continued to glaze everything around us, and I could see my breath in the cold air flowing through my open door. Do what you have to do, Patricia, I finally said. But I'm not turning off my generator. If you want to fine me, send me the paperwork. I'll see you in court. Her face flushed red despite the cold. You're making a very big mistake, Brian. This association has rules for a reason, and nobody is above them, not even you. She turned and carefully picked her way back to her running escalade, nearly slipping twice on the ice. I watched her drive away, shaking my head at the absurdity of the situation. I went back inside and tried to focus on my work, but I was bothered by the confrontation. I'd always tried to be a good neighbor and a conscientious member of the community. I kept my lawn maintained, followed the architectural guidelines, and generally stayed out of HOA drama. The idea that I was now being targeted for having the foresight to install emergency backup power seemed insane. Around 5 that evening, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Gary from across the street, along with 2 other neighbors I recognized from HOA meetings. Jennifer Martinez from 2 houses down and Tom Parker from the corner lot. We heard Patricia came by to hassle you about your generator, Gary said without preamble. News travels fast, I replied. She called an emergency HOA board meeting at her house, Jennifer explained. She was one of 3 board members besides Patricia. She wanted us to officially issue you a violation notice and start the fining process. And, I asked. We told her she was out of her mind, Tom said bluntly. He was a retired fire chief and didn't mince words. There's no reasonable interpretation of our bylaws that would prohibit running a backup generator during a power outage. That's literally what they're for. She's claiming excessive noise, I said. Jennifer rolled her eyes. Your generator isn't even that loud, and considering the circumstances, any reasonable person would consider it appropriate. The problem is that Patricia has been on a power trip lately, Gary added. She's been trying to enforce increasingly petty rules, and a lot of us are getting fed up with it. What exactly did she say in the meeting? I asked. She said you were being defiant and setting a bad example, Jennifer said. She claimed that if we let you get away with violating the rules, it would encourage other homeowners to ignore HOA regulations. Tom and I voted against issuing any violation notice, which means she doesn't have the votes to proceed officially. But I sensed there was more to this story. But she said she's going to pursue it anyway as president, Tom finished. She's claiming emergency authority to act unilaterally. Is that actually allowed? It's a gray area in our bylaws, Jennifer admitted. The president does have some emergency powers, but they're supposed to be used for things like authorizing repairs or making time-sensitive decisions, not for harassing residents about generators during ice storms. We talked for a while longer, and they assured me that they'd support me if Patricia tried to push the issue. They also mentioned that several other residents were already talking about voting her out at the next annual meeting in April. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to fall afoul of her increasingly authoritarian interpretation of HOA rules. After they left, I made dinner and settled in for what I expected would be a long night. The temperature outside had dropped to 8 degrees, and the ice continued to accumulate. I checked the local news and saw that the power company was estimating 4 to 6 days before full restoration, depending on the extent of the damage. Friday morning dawned clear and brutally cold. My generator had run flawlessly through the night, and my house remained comfortable. I ventured outside to check on the generator and clear some ice from my walkways. That's when I noticed something odd. My generator had been accessed. The maintenance panel was slightly ajar, and there were footprints in the ice around it. Fresh footprints from that morning, because they were on top of the ice that had formed overnight. I opened the panel fully and inspected the generator. Nothing seemed damaged, but I could tell someone had been messing with it. The emergency shutoff switch had been partially turned, though not enough to actually disable the unit. It looked like someone had tried to turn off my generator but either didn't know how or had been interrupted. I felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. Someone had trespassed on my property and attempted to sabotage my emergency power supply. I went inside and reviewed the footage from my security cameras. I'd installed them a year ago after some package thefts in the neighborhood, and they covered most of my property, including the side yard where the generator was located. The footage was clear. At 6:45 that morning, while it was still dark, Patricia Cunningham had crept onto my property. She'd spent several minutes examining the generator, trying different things to turn it off. When she couldn't figure it out, she'd eventually given up and left. I saved the footage to multiple locations and called the non-emergency police line. Given the weather emergency, I didn't expect a quick response, but I wanted to file a report. The dispatcher took my information and said an officer would follow up when possible, but they were dealing with numerous weather-related emergencies. I also called my home insurance company and my lawyer, a friend from college named Marcus Webb who practiced in Springfield. Marcus was working from his home office like I was, and he agreed to review the footage and my HOA documents. "This is pretty clear-cut trespassing and attempted sabotage," Marcus said after I'd emailed him the videos. "The fact that she's the HOA president doesn't give her the right to enter your property without permission or to tamper with your equipment." "What are my options?" I asked. "You can pursue criminal charges, get a restraining order, or both. You can also sue the HOA for harassment, but let's start with a strongly worded cease and desist letter. Sometimes that's enough to bring people to their senses." Marcus drafted the letter that morning and sent it electronically to Patricia, with copies to the other HOA board members. It clearly stated that she was not to enter my property again, not to interfere with my generator, and that any further harassment would result in legal action. Her response came 2 hours later, and it was unhinged. She sent an email to the entire HOA distribution list, accusing me of being a selfish neighbor who cared more about my own comfort than the community's well-being. She claimed I was running the generator unnecessarily, that it was creating a safety hazard, and that she had every right to inspect equipment that was potentially dangerous to the neighborhood. She also announced that she was formally fining me $500 per day, starting from Thursday, for violation of the noise ordinances. The email included a demand that I pay $2,500 by the end of the following week to cover the first 5 days. The response from other neighbors was swift and largely supportive of me. Multiple people replied, all to point out that Patricia was overstepping her authority, that the bylaws didn't support her interpretation, and that she needed to back down. A few people even suggested an emergency meeting to remove her from the board. But Patricia doubled down. She sent another email claiming that anyone who supported my flagrant violation of HOA rules was also in violation of their duties as homeowners. She threatened to start inspecting other properties for violations and to pursue fines against anyone who didn't support her authority. That's when things got interesting in a way I didn't expect. Tom Parker, the retired fire chief, sent an email that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. He pointed out something I hadn't even considered. Several homes in our subdivision, including Patricia's own home, had sump pumps that depended on electricity to prevent basement flooding. With the ground frozen and the drainage creek running through the development, any thawing or additional precipitation could cause serious water issues. Tom noted that the subdivision's drainage system had been designed with the assumption that individual homes would handle their own basement water management through sump pumps. Without power, those sump pumps were useless. And with extended power outages, basements could flood, potentially causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage across the neighborhood. He then mentioned something that made my blood run cold. My property sat at a slightly higher elevation than several other homes, and my sump pump discharged into the same drainage system that fed past other properties. More importantly, Tom had observed during a heavy rain last spring that Patricia's house, along with 4 others on her street, had chronic water issues due to the high water table and poor initial grading. I went down to my basement and looked at my sump pump. It was running regularly, discharging water every 15 or 20 minutes. The ground might be frozen on top, but water was still moving underground, seeping into basements through foundation walls and floor drains. An idea formed in my mind. It wasn't a nice idea, but neither was being harassed and having my property trespassed upon. Patricia wanted me to turn off my generator. She wanted me to be without power like everyone else. And technically, if I turned off my generator, my sump pump would stop working too. I want to be clear. I didn't immediately act on this idea. I sat with it for several hours, considering the implications. I'm not a vindictive person by nature, and the thought of potentially causing property damage, even to someone who was harassing me, didn't sit well with me. But Friday afternoon, Patricia escalated again. She came back to my house, this time with a man I didn't recognize. When I answered the door, she announced that she'd brought a noise consultant to measure the sound levels from my generator. The man, who introduced himself as Dave something or other, proceeded to walk around my property with a decibel meter. I followed them, making it clear they were not welcome. But Patricia claimed she was exercising her authority as HOA president to investigate violations. Dave took measurements from various locations, and his readings showed that my generator was producing about 65 decibels from 10 feet away, dropping to about 50 decibels at the property line. For context, normal conversation is about 60 decibels, and most municipal noise ordinances allow for 70 decibels during daytime hours. These readings are well within normal limits, Dave told Patricia, but it's constant, she argued. The sustained nature of the noise makes it excessive. Madam, I'm telling you this isn't excessive noise by any standard definition. It's a properly functioning generator during a power outage. Patricia's face turned red. I'm not paying you to tell me what I already know. I'm paying you to document that this noise is a problem. Dave looked uncomfortable. I can't falsify data. The readings are what they are. Patricia's response was to accuse him of being incompetent and refuse to pay him. The poor guy left looking frustrated, and Patricia turned on me. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You think you're so smart, but you're going to regret defying me." "Patricia, you need to leave my property now," I said firmly. "You've received a cease and desist letter. If you come back here again, I'm calling the police." "The police are too busy dealing with real emergencies to care about your petty complaints. Trespassing and harassment aren't petty. Leave now." She finally left, but not before taking photos of my generator with her phone, muttering about reporting me to the city for permit violations. That evening, I made my decision. I called Gary, Tom, and Jennifer and told them what I was considering. Their reactions were mixed. "That's pretty harsh," Jennifer said. "I mean, I get that she's being unreasonable but flooding basements." "I'm not causing anything," I pointed out. "I'm simply complying with her demand to turn off my generator. If that has consequences for other people's sump pumps, well, that's the result she asked for." "She doesn't understand that connection," Gary said. "She has no idea that your generator staying on is actually helping other people too." "Maybe she needs to learn that actions have consequences," Tom said. "And technically, you'd just be doing what she demanded. It's not your fault if other people suffer from her bad decision." We debated it for a while longer, and ultimately I told them I'd think about it overnight. But Saturday morning made my decision for me. I woke to find that someone had thrown eggs at my house. Frozen eggs, which had shattered against my siding and left marks. There were also nails scattered in my driveway, clearly intended to damage my tires. And someone had spray-painted "selfish" on my mailbox. The security cameras caught everything. It wasn't Patricia this time, but a teenager I recognized as her son, Trevor. He'd done this around 3 in the morning, presumably at his mother's direction, or at least with her knowledge. I was done. I tried to be reasonable. I'd offered to help neighbors, I'd followed all the rules, and I'd kept my cool in the face of harassment. But vandalism was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I went to my generator and shut it off manually. Then I went inside and flipped the main breaker, disconnecting my house from the generator entirely. I drained my water lines, turned off my main water supply, and prepared my house for freezing temperatures. Then I packed a bag, loaded my dog into my truck, and drove carefully to a hotel in Springfield that had power. Before I left, I sent an email to the HOA distribution list. I explained that due to the ongoing harassment from the HOA president, I was complying with her demand to shut down my generator. I noted that this meant my sump pump would no longer be operational, which might have implications for the drainage system that served multiple homes. I attached photos of the vandalism and stated that I'd filed police reports for both the trespassing incident and the vandalism. I also sent a separate email to Tom, Gary, and Jennifer, letting them know what I'd done and why. I told them I was sorry if this caused problems, but I'd reached my limit. The hotel I checked into was a Hampton Inn off Interstate 44. It was full of other people who'd evacuated from powerless homes, and the atmosphere was surprisingly social. People were sharing stories about the storm, charging devices in every available outlet, and generally making the best of a bad situation. I spent Saturday evening monitoring the neighborhood Facebook page and the HOA email list from the comfort of my warm hotel room. The first hints of trouble started appearing around 8 that evening. Karen Mitchell, who lived 2 doors down from Patricia, posted that her basement was getting wet. She'd checked on it and found standing water around her furnace. Several other people chimed in with similar reports. Patricia herself sent an email asking if anyone had a gas-powered generator she could borrow. She didn't explain why, but I knew. Her sump pump had stopped working, and water was accumulating in her basement. By Sunday morning, the situation had deteriorated significantly. The temperature had risen slightly overnight, enough to cause some melting, and several basements were flooding. Patricia sent an increasingly frantic series of emails begging someone to help her with her water problem. Tom Parker, to his credit, explained the issue clearly in an email to the whole neighborhood. He detailed how the drainage system worked, how sump pumps were essential to prevent flooding, and how the extended power outage was creating a crisis for homes without backup power. He also pointed out that I'd warned about this issue before shutting down my own generator in compliance with Patricia's demands. The response was swift and angry, but not directed at me. People who were now dealing with flooded basements realized that Patricia's vendetta against my generator had led directly to this situation. If she'd left me alone, my generator would still be running, my sump pump would still be working, and at least part of the neighborhood's drainage system would be functioning better. Patricia tried to claim that I'd turned off my generator out of spite, not because she demanded it. But multiple people pointed out her own emails demanding that I shut it down. She'd created this problem through her own unreasonable demands. By Sunday afternoon, I was getting calls and texts from neighbors. Some were apologetic, some were angry at Patricia, and a few were begging me to come back and turn my generator back on. Jennifer called to tell me that she and Tom were organizing an emergency board meeting to remove Patricia from her position as president. "This has gotten completely out of hand," Jennifer said. "She's caused actual damage to people's properties because of her power trip. We need her out before she does more harm." "What's the process for that?" I asked. "According to our bylaws, a majority vote of the board can remove an officer." "We have 5 board members, and I know Tom and I will vote to remove her. I'm pretty sure we can get at least one more vote." "What about the vandalism to my property?" Trevor admitted to his father what he did. "Apparently, Patricia told him you were a bad person who was hurting the neighborhood." The dad is furious with both of them. He's already offered to pay for repairs and have Trevor apologize personally. Monday brought another complication. The Springfield Police Department finally sent an officer to take reports about the trespassing and vandalism. Officer David Reynolds met me at the hotel and reviewed all the security footage. He was thorough and professional, and he took my statement seriously. "This is pretty clear-cut," he said after reviewing everything. "We've got video evidence of trespassing, attempted sabotage, and vandalism." The fact that the vandalism was done by a minor complicates things slightly, but he's 17, so he can be charged. And the mother could potentially face charges for her actions too. "What happens next?" I asked. "I'll submit these reports to the prosecutor's office. They'll decide what charges to file, if any. Given that this is all caught on camera and well documented, I'd say charges are likely. You should also talk to your insurance company about the damages." Tuesday was the emergency HOA board meeting. It was held via video conference since power was still out in most of the neighborhood. I joined the call from my hotel room, along with about 40 other residents who'd heard about the meeting. Patricia fought hard against her removal, claiming that she was being persecuted for trying to enforce the rules. She argued that I was the problem, not her, and that removing her would set a dangerous precedent of allowing residents to flout HOA regulations. Tom Parker presented a methodical case against her, documenting her pattern of overreach, the improper entry onto my property, the baseless fines she'd attempted to levy, and the ultimate result of her actions: multiple flooded basements and thousands of dollars in damage to homes. Jennifer Reed prepared statements from several homeowners detailing the damage to their properties. One couple was facing $15,000 in damage to their finished basement. Another family had lost their furnace to water damage. Patricia's own basement had nearly 3 feet of water in it. The vote wasn't even close. 4 board members voted to remove Patricia from her position as president, with only Patricia herself voting against. Tom was immediately voted in as interim president. One of Tom's first actions was to send an official email on HOA letterhead apologizing to me for Patricia's harassment and requesting that I return to my home and resume normal operations. He also suspended all fines that Patricia had threatened and initiated a review of HOA procedures to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. I returned home Tuesday evening. The power was still out in the neighborhood, though the utility company was saying it would be restored within the next day or two. I fired up my generator, and within an hour, my sump pump was running again. Several neighbors stopped by to thank me and apologize for Patricia's behavior. Gary brought over a bottle of bourbon as a peace offering. Jennifer and her husband brought homemade cookies. Even the couple whose basement had sustained the most damage stopped by to say they didn't blame me and understood why I'd done what I did. Patricia's house was dark and quiet. I later learned that she and her family had moved to a hotel after her basement flooded. The damage to her house was extensive because she'd let the water accumulate for nearly 2 days before finally evacuating. Wednesday afternoon, power was restored to most of Oak Ridge estates. My generator automatically shut down when it detected power from the grid, and the neighborhood began returning to normal. Well, as normal as it could be with several homes dealing with flood damage. Thursday morning, I got a call from Officer Reynolds. The prosecutor's office had decided to file charges. Patricia was being charged with criminal trespass and attempted criminal mischief. Trevor was being charged with vandalism as a juvenile, though he'd likely end up with community service and restitution rather than jail time. "There's something else you should know," Officer Reynolds said. "Miss Cunningham tried to file a counter-complaint against you for intentional property damage. She claimed you deliberately shut off your generator to flood her basement. What happened with that?" The prosecutor laughed her out of the office. "You have documented evidence that she demanded you shut off your generator. You complied with her demand. The fact that compliance had negative consequences for her doesn't make you liable, especially when you warned about those consequences. She essentially caused her own damage through her actions." The legal process moved forward over the next several weeks. Patricia hired a lawyer and tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. In March, she accepted a plea deal that included probation, restitution for the damage to my mailbox and siding, a fine, and an agreement to resign from all HOA positions permanently. Trevor did his community service and wrote me a surprisingly thoughtful apology letter explaining that he'd been manipulated by his mother, and now understood that I hadn't been the villain in the situation. His parents made him pay for the repairs out of his own savings. The civil side was more complex. Patricia's insurance company refused to pay for her flood damage, ruling that it was caused by her own actions rather than the storm. She tried to sue the HOA for failing to prevent the flooding, But that went nowhere since the HOA had no responsibility to provide power to individual homes. She even tried to sue me directly, claiming I had a duty to keep my generator running for the benefit of the neighborhood. That lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice within 2 months. The judge actually chastised Patricia's lawyer for bringing such a frivolous case, pointing out that I had no legal duty to provide power to other homes, and that I'd actually complied with Patricia's own demands when I shut off the generator. The financial impact on Patricia was severe. Between the flood damage to her house, legal fees, fines, and restitution, she was looking at over $40,000 in expenses. Her homeowner's insurance had tried to deny the entire claim, though I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was fighting that decision. The emotional toll on her was evident too. She became a pariah in the neighborhood. People who'd once supported her authoritarian approach to HOA management now saw her as the cautionary tale she'd become. Several residents reported her to the state for HOA violations when they discovered she'd been mismanaging HOA funds, using association money for personal expenses. That investigation revealed that Patricia had been charging personal meals and even clothing to the HOA credit card, claiming they were business expenses. The State Homeowner Association Oversight Board fined her personally and required her to repay nearly $8,000 to the association. By April, when the regular annual HOA meeting rolled around, Patricia and her family had put their house up for sale. They couldn't afford the repairs from the flood damage combined with all the other expenses, and they couldn't stand the social isolation of being outcasts in their own neighborhood. The annual meeting was the most well-attended in Oak Ridge Estates history. Nearly 70% of homeowners showed up, either in person or by proxy. Tom Parker was officially elected as president, and the residents voted to implement sweeping changes to the HOA bylaws. The new rules included strict limitations on the president's emergency powers, requiring board approval for any fines over $100, and implementing a formal appeals process for homeowners who felt they'd been unfairly targeted. We also added explicit language protecting essential safety equipment like generators, sump pumps, and security systems from noise complaints during emergencies. I was asked to join the board as a member at large, and I accepted. I figured I'd earned the right to help shape the organization that had caused me so much trouble. Plus, I wanted to make sure nobody else went through what I'd experienced. The meeting ended with a discussion about community preparedness. Several homeowners had been inspired by my generator to consider backup power solutions for their own homes. Tom, with his fire service background, organized a neighborhood emergency preparedness committee to help educate residents about disaster planning. We also voted to set up a community emergency fund that could help residents who faced unexpected disasters. It was funded through voluntary contributions and was specifically designed to help people who couldn't afford things like generators or emergency repairs. Patricia's house sold in May, significantly below market value because the basement damage hadn't been fully repaired. I heard they moved to Kansas City, far enough away that they'd never have to face anyone from Oak Ridge Estates again. The criminal case wrapped up in June. Patricia completed her probation requirements, though she violated them once by trying to contact me through a fake social media account to harass me. That earned her an additional 90 days of probation and a stern warning from the judge. Trevor, on the other hand, seemed to learn from the experience. His father made sure he completed his community service working with Habitat for Humanity, and the kid apparently discovered he enjoyed construction work. He ended up applying to trade schools instead of traditional colleges, much to his mother's dismay but his father's support. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm struck by how quickly things escalated and how much damage one person's ego and stubbornness could cause. Patricia couldn't stand the idea that someone was prepared when she wasn't. She couldn't tolerate the thought that I'd followed the rules and still did something she didn't like. Her need for control was so overwhelming that she couldn't see how her actions were hurting not just me, but the entire community. The ice storm itself caused millions of dollars in damage across Springfield and Greene County. Trees were destroyed, roofs collapsed under ice weight, and the power infrastructure took a beating. But in Oak Ridge Estates, the most expensive damage wasn't from the ice itself, but from one person's vindictive campaign against a neighbor's generator. I've kept my generator, obviously. It runs its weekly test every Monday morning, and every time I hear it kick on, I think about that week in January when having backup power became the most controversial thing in the neighborhood. I've also kept all the documentation from that time, just in case anyone ever questions what happened. The neighborhood itself has become much stronger. The experience galvanized us in a way that years of normal HOA operations never could. We actually know our neighbors now, we look out for each other, and we have systems in place to handle emergencies collectively rather than individually. Gary across the street did end up getting his own generator installed the following fall. So did Jennifer and 3 other families. When there was a brief power outage during a summer storm, 5 generators kicked on across the neighborhood, and nobody complained about the noise. Tom has been an excellent HOA president, focusing on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. He organized neighborhood cleanup days, improved our common areas, and negotiated better rates with our landscaping and snow removal services. Under his leadership, Oak Ridge Estates actually feels like a community rather than just a collection of houses with strict rules. I still work from home, and my telecommunications job keeps me busy. The generator has kicked on a few more times since that memorable January, always performing flawlessly. Each time, I'm grateful for the investment and for the lesson it taught me about preparation, community, and the importance of standing up to bullies, even when they have official titles. The most satisfying moment came about 8 months after the ice storm. I was outside doing some yard work when a moving truck pulled up to Patricia's old house. A young family was moving in, a couple with 2 small kids. I walked over to introduce myself and welcome them to the neighborhood. The husband, a friendly guy named Marcus who was a teacher at one of the local high schools, mentioned they'd gotten a great deal on the house because of some previous water damage. I gave them the brief version of what had happened, focusing on the flooding caused by the power outage rather than all the drama. "We're actually planning to install a generator," Marcus told me. "After hearing about what happened, we want to make sure we're prepared." I offered to share my contractor's information and some advice about what had worked well for my installation. As we talked, I realized this was exactly the kind of neighbor I'd hoped to have when I first moved to Oak Ridge Estates. Someone practical, prepared, and focused on taking care of their family rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. The final legal loose end was tied up in September when Patricia's lawsuit appeal was denied. She tried one last time to argue that I'd been negligent in shutting off my generator, but the appeals court upheld the dismissal. The ruling actually created some interesting precedent in Missouri about HOA authority and homeowner rights during emergencies. My lawyer Marcus, who'd handled everything brilliantly, sent me a copy of the ruling with a note. This is going in my case file as an example of how not to be an HOA president. Also, you might want to frame this. It's not every day you win a case this decisively. I did frame it, actually. It hangs in my home office, right where I can see it when I'm working. It's a reminder that doing the right thing sometimes means standing up to people who have authority, even when it's uncomfortable. It's also a reminder that preparation isn't paranoia, and that sometimes the best response to unreasonable demands is to give people exactly what they asked for. The ice storm of January has become part of Oak Ridge Estate's lore. New residents hear about it during HOA meetings, usually in the context of emergency preparedness discussions. It's become a teaching moment about the importance of reasonable leadership and community cooperation. I've been asked several times if I regret how things played out, if I wish I'd handled it differently. Honestly, I don't. I tried to be reasonable. I offered help to neighbors. I followed all the rules. When Patricia escalated, I responded appropriately through legal channels. And when she left me no choice, I complied with exactly what she demanded, knowing it would backfire on her. Could I have kept my generator running despite her threats? Maybe. But that would have led to months of legal battles and escalating harassment. By shutting it down and letting the consequences unfold naturally, I proved my point more effectively than any argument could have. Sometimes the best way to deal with an unreasonable person is to give them exactly what they think they want. The generator hums outside right now, actually, running its weekly Monday morning test. It's a sound I've grown to appreciate, not just for what it provides, but for what it represents. Independence, preparation, and the willingness to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. Oak Ridge Estates is a better place now than it was before the ice storm. We learned hard lessons about leadership, community, and the difference between rules that serve people and rules that control them. Patricia's reign as HOA president ultimately became the catalyst for positive change, though not in any way she intended. As I sit here finishing up this account, I can see Gary across the street washing his truck, Jennifer walking her dog past my house with a friendly wave, and Tom checking the mailbox at the end of his driveway. These are my neighbors, my community, and the people who stood by me when I needed support. The ice melted, the power came back on, and life in Oak Ridge Estates returned to normal. But we're all a little wiser now, a little more prepared, and a lot more aware that the greatest threats to a community don't always come from outside. Sometimes they come from within, from people who confuse authority with power and control with leadership. My generator sits on its concrete pad, surrounded by the arborvitae shrubs that have grown fuller and taller over the years. It's properly permitted, legally installed, and ready to do exactly what it was designed to do: keep my home safe and functional when the power grid fails. And if that's controversial to someone, well, they're welcome to complain to the HOA president. I'm sure Tom will give their concerns exactly the consideration they deserve.